I call him member for Bowman.
Male suicide in Queensland is 2.5 times more common than in our major cities. A really important point that came out of Suicide in Remote and Rural Australia report released this month. It also shone light back on this perennial challenge for health systems, that being mental health. And obviously, one of the great challenges for regional Australia is that the current government doesn't have a regional health services portfolio, so it leaves it to us on the coalition to run around the country and constantly hold this government to account for its activities in mental health. Of course, people living with mental health issues deserve all the support that we can muster. It's a $6 billion issue for the economy and for the nation. And of course, a combination of great therapists, world-leading drugs, early intervention, recognition and high levels of awareness all play a really important role. So we welcome the release of another report this month. The message to the government clearly has to be it's way more important to be providing cutting-edge, state-of-the-art care for people living with mental health issues than it is just releasing reports. We don't want reports that accumulate dust on bookshelves. We need real live solutions, and particularly in regional and rural Australia, where they bear the brunt of mental health morbidity, for the obvious reasons. People living in regional Australia are a long way from services. Incomes are in general lower. Out-of-pockets for health services are generally higher. It's very, very hard to coordinate care for chronic and complex conditions. So at every level, we need to look out for those living in regional and remote parts of this country. We know if we get it right out there, Deputy Speaker, we will be getting it right in the city as well. So it was very, very disappointing to see a breakthrough drug already approved in 3 other countries around the world being refused not once, not twice, but in March of this year 3 times by the PBAC. This is a process that both sides of government should be respecting, and certainly the Coalition has the record for having done that in government. But what we have is a new challenge to our PBAC and the price referencing that they rigidly apply, which we strongly support. And that is that in categories of disease that are relatively slow-moving for new breakthrough drugs, where the existing treatment has now fallen to a generic price, it becomes very hard for new arriving treatments to be price referenced according to their cost effectivity. Instead, they're price referenced often according to a generic price. It basically means it's very, very hard to get payment for a brand new breakthrough drug and the cost it's taken to bring it down the pipeline. Contrast that with cancer, where there are so many new breakthroughs all the time. The cost comparisons are always with a brand new and usually very expensive drug. This is a challenge for mental health, where we haven't seen new drugs for a very long time. If, as we know, a colleague of mine, Andrew Robb, who wrote in Black Dog Days, just how tough it can be switching between medications when you're struggling in this situation, particularly with depression, where there are strong effects to one's sleep. Without sleeping well, a productive, successful life can be turned into a misery. And agomelatine offered a solution to that issue. Now, the drug has been refused 3 times and the manufacturer has given up. They have left and will not be trying again. Now, that might just seem like a sob story from an individual pharmaceutical manufacturer. But what it does mean is we now have a 2-tiered system in this country. We have the wealthy who can pay for the best drugs, and everyone else makes do with what is left. And that should always be a concern to every government. So without making too much of a political point, because we all support the price referencing and the foundations of the PBAC process, let's also be aware that when there are specific challenges that actually make it almost impossible for a new drug to prove its worth in this country, quite simply because the comparators used are only costing a few dollars. For the sake of people whose lives could be turned around, there's 10,000 of them in this country who might well benefit from this as an alternative treatment for depression. We should be looking for ways to make sure that our PBAC process supports that. We know from the report released this month that there are social, cultural and economic underpinnings to the distribution of depression around this country. We know that a combination of macho Australian attitudes, fluctuations in the economy for those living on the land, and of course the fires and the droughts and the bushfires have all really had a compounding effect and have made it really, really hard to convince many people living in remote areas to step out of where they live and where they work and actually talk about the challenges that they have. We can do that together with both sides of politics, but I do implore this government to respect the PBAC process. If a drug is approved, don't let it be held up in Cabinet. We respect that process. Don't second guess it. If you're going to have a recommendation and ignore it at Cabinet level, then don't have the committee. Just make the whole thing politicised. But don't live in this middle world where you both accept the experts' report but you don't actually act on it. That's the challenge of the PBAC. It's one we should support from both sides of this chamber.
I thank the member for Bowman.